Have you ever walked away from an argument feeling empty, even though you said everything you thought you needed to say? Have you ever drowned in the noise of your own mind, replaying conversations, regretting words, or wishing you had spoken differently? And have you ever wondered if all that noise, all that explaining, all that trying was nothing more than weakness in disguise? What if the greatest strength available to you is not in the storm of your words, but in the stillness between them? What if silence, the thing you've been taught to fear, the thing you often mistake for defeat, is actually your sharpest blade, your strongest shield, your hidden crown? In this journey, you and I will descend into the chaos of the mind. Overthinking, ego, insecurity, the endless hunger for validation. And from there, rise into something higher, a silence that doesn't hide, a silence that commands, a silence that liberates you from being controlled and turns you into someone who cannot be shaken. Stay until the end, because by the final chapter, I will give you 10 real-world examples you can use today to transform silence into power, clarity, and peace. But first, let's uncover what silence truly is. If you're ready to walk this path with me, subscribe to the channel and join this community of seekers. Now let's begin. The misunderstood companion, silence. For most people, it's a void, an emptiness, a gap waiting to be filled. We've been conditioned to treat silence as a problem. In conversations, silence makes us anxious. In relationships, silence feels like distance. In our own minds, silence often feels unbearable. The moment the noise stops, the truth seeps in. In modern culture, silence has been demonized. We've been taught that to be strong is to speak, to explain, to defend. We equate noise with power. Politicians talk endlessly. Influencers shout louder to be heard. Families argue to prove who's right. But buried beneath all that noise is a secret. The one who is most secure does not need to speak. Silence is not absence. Silence is presence. It's the ground beneath the storm. It's the pause between heartbeats. It is not weakness, it is awareness. But because most people are terrified of what they'll discover in silence, they fill it with endless words. And in that act, they reveal themselves. So the first truth is this: silence is not the lack of voice. It is the unseen voice, the most honest one, the one that doesn't beg to be heard, because it already is. But if silence is so powerful, why then do we see it as weakness? That is where we must go next. The lies we inherited from childhood were taught to use our words. Silence is labeled as awkward, rude, or antisocial. In school, those who speak up are rewarded. At work, those who dominate the room are seen as leaders. At home, those who argue loudest are often the ones who win. We've been conditioned to believe silence equals submission. If you don't defend yourself, you must have no defense. If you don't explain, you must not understand. If you don't argue, you must have lost. But here's the paradox. The ones who need to prove themselves through words are the most insecure. Their endless talking is camouflage for their fragile ego. The louder the voice, the weaker the ground beneath it. Philosopher Blaise Pascal once said, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." That truth extends beyond solitude. Our inability to embrace silence in conversation, in confrontation, in life itself, is the root of much of our suffering. When you speak, you give away your position. When you over-explain, you reveal your fear. When you argue, you show that you need the other person's validation. Silence, on the other hand, needs nothing. But here's the deeper secret. Silence isn't just powerful in theory. It works especially well against certain types of people. And that's where its sharpest edge is revealed. The ones who fear silence. Not everyone is disarmed by silence, but certain people crumble under it. The manipulator, the narcissist, the loud, arrogant soul who thrives on reaction. These types live by feeding on your energy. They provoke, accuse, insult, demand. Not because they seek truth, but because they seek control. Their game depends on your response. When you rise to their bait, you give them the stage. When you defend yourself, you confirm their power. When you react emotionally, you hand them the script. But silence cuts their strings. Silence starves them of control. Silence forces them to confront themselves. And that terrifies them, because deep down they are hollow. Their confidence is a costume. Their arrogance is a mask. And when you refuse to play, their mask begins to crack. It's not that silence always wins in a single moment. It's that silence is unplayable. It rewrites the game. You become an unmoving wall, and they, with all their noise, exhaust themselves against it. But knowing who silence works against is not enough. The real question is, how do you use it wisely? That's where many people mistake silence for weakness. Let's dig deeper. The art of controlled stillness. Silence is a weapon, but like all weapons, it can be misused. Many confuse silence with passivity. They go quiet not from strength, but from fear. They avoid confrontation, swallow their voice, and call it peace. But that is not peace. That is surrender, dressed up as wisdom. Nietzsche warned of this when he described slave morality, the mindset of those who choose submission and call it virtue. The silence of power is different. It is active, intentional. It radiates presence. When you choose silence in the face of provocation, you are not bowing down. You are standing taller than the noise around you. You're saying, I owe you nothing. Your storm cannot touch me. This kind of silence doesn't avoid confrontation. It transcends it. It doesn't hide from the fight. It simply chooses not to fight battles unworthy of its energy. But here's the key. Silence must be paired with awareness. Observe, study, see beyond the words being thrown at you. Every insult reveals insecurity. Every over-explanation reveals fear. Your silence allows you to see clearly while others are blind in their noise. But how exactly do we cultivate this kind of silence? The one that commands respect instead of inviting domination? That's what we'll explore next. The psychology of silence. Why does silence cut so deeply into others? The answer lies in psychology. When someone expects a response and you don't give it, their brain enters uncertainty. The human mind hates uncertainty more than it hates being wrong. Social psychology has shown that in tense situations, silence is almost always interpreted as judgment. Even if you're simply listening, the other person begins to wonder, what are they thinking? Did they see through me? Are they rejecting me? The amygdala, the part of the brain that controls fear and anxiety, lights up. Suddenly, the other person is no longer focused on their argument, but on their own insecurity. Your silence becomes a mirror, reflecting everything they wanted to hide. This is why silence feels threatening to those who rely on control. It forces them to hear their own voice without resistance. And in that echo, they see the cracks. So remember this, silence doesn't just withhold your power, it multiplies it. By saying nothing, you let the other person reveal everything. But here's the danger, silence will also challenge you. Can you endure the discomfort of holding it? That's where we go next. The discipline of holding back. Silence is easy to talk about, but brutally hard to practice. Why? Because your ego hates it. Your ego wants to explain, to be understood, to be right. When you hold silence, your ego screams inside you, say something, defend yourself, don't let them think they've won. But that voice is the very prison you're here to escape. True silence demands discipline. It demands that you resist the addiction to approval, that you recognize that your value is not in how others perceive you, but in how deeply you hold yourself. Think of a seasoned martial artist. They don't swing wildly at every provocation. They wait. They watch. They know that the first reckless move often loses the fight. Silence works the same way. It is the calm stance of the master, conserving energy, revealing nothing, waiting for the perfect opening. But here's the truth. At first, silence will feel unbearable. You will shake. You will itch to break it. Yet if you endure, something strange happens. The tension shifts. What was once heavy for you becomes heavy for them, and you, unmoving, begin to grow lighter. This endurance is the gateway to mastery, but endurance alone is not enough. You must also learn to use silence as a strategic tool, and that's where we turn next. If this message is resonating with you, pause for a moment and subscribe to the channel. Not just to support the work, but to commit yourself to walking this path of deeper awareness. Together, we're building a community where silence is strength and presence is power. Silence as a strategy. Silence, when intentional, becomes more than restraint. It becomes a weapon of precision. Here are 4 ways it works strategically. 1. The pause. In conversation, a well-placed pause unsettles more than any sharp reply. People rush to fill the gap, and in their rushing, they reveal what they didn't want to say. 2. The mirror. Your silence reflects the other person back to themselves. The more they speak into your stillness, the more they confront their own contradictions. 3. The timing. Not all silence is equal. Sometimes you hold it for seconds, sometimes for hours, sometimes for years. Time magnifies silence. The longer you hold it, the more gravity it gains. The surprise. Because silence is rare, people expect noise. When you withhold it, you become unpredictable, and the unpredictable always holds the advantage. But remember, silence is not always about saying nothing. It is about speaking less, but speaking with absolute precision. One sentence dropped at the right moment can topple an entire argument that an hour of debate could not. Now that you understand silence as a strategy, you must also learn when not to use it, because silence misused can betray you. That's where many fall into danger. When silence becomes a trap, not all silence is strength. There is a silence that is not chosen, but forced. A silence born from fear, from guilt, from the desperate hope to keep the peace. This kind of silence is toxic. It drains you. It convinces you that you're being wise, when in reality you're being used. Abusers, manipulators, and exploiters thrive when you mistake submission for composure. They depend on your silence to continue their dominance. Nietzsche once said, "He who cannot command himself will always obey." The same applies to silence. If you cannot choose your silence, then your silence is not strength, it is obedience. So the question you must ask yourself is, why am I silent right now? If it's because you fear rejection, if it's because you want to avoid tension at any cost, then your silence is not power, it is surrender. True silence is never about hiding. It is about standing so firmly in yourself that words become unnecessary. It is not the silence of chains. It is the silence of freedom. And that distinction between silence as weakness and silence as power is what determines whether you will remain controlled or whether you will begin to control your life. Next, we'll see how to flip that switch. Silence and the ego. The ego is the loudest enemy of silence. It is that restless voice inside your head, always narrating, always defending, always proving. The ego is terrified of being ignored, of being unseen, of not existing. This is why silence feels like death to the ego. When you refuse to speak, the ego panics. It tells you that you'll look weak, that people will misunderstand you, that you'll lose everything if you don't rush to explain yourself. But here's the truth. You cannot kill the ego by fighting it. Fighting it is still giving it attention. The only way to weaken the ego is to starve it. Silence starves it. Like a fire without fuel, the ego burns itself out when you no longer feed it with constant reaction. This is why spiritual masters speak less and listen more. Their words carry weight because they are not spoken from the ego's hunger, but from a deeper presence. When you embrace silence, you step out of the ego's prison and into the vastness beyond it. But what lies beyond ego isn't just peace, it's power. Because when the ego falls silent, a new self begins to rise. That's what we'll uncover next. The overman of silence. Nietzsche imagined the Übermensch, the overman, as the human who transcends the herd, the conditioning, the desperate need for approval. And one of the signs of such a being is mastery of silence. The overman does not need to explain. He does not need to win debates. He does not crumble under misunderstanding. His silence is not passive, it is radiance. It is presence so strong that words would only dilute it. Think of the great figures of history who commanded without raising their voices. Gandhi, Marcus Aurelius. Even in myth, the wise sage speaks rarely, and when he does, his words echo for centuries. Their silence was not emptiness. It was density. It was gravity. This is the silence you must cultivate, the silence that is not reaction but creation. You are not avoiding the world. You are shaping it with your stillness. But here comes the challenge. If silence is so powerful, why does it make you feel so uncomfortable at first? That paradox is the next step on this path. Facing the discomfort. Let's be honest, silence hurts. Not just others. It hurts you. It confronts you with your own thoughts, your own fears, your own wounds. And most people cannot bear that weight. That is why they escape into constant talking, constant scrolling, constant distraction. When you first begin to practice silence, you will feel the pull of that discomfort. It will feel unnatural. Your body will ache to speak, to explain, to break the tension. But this discomfort is not a sign of weakness. It is the beginning of transformation. Think of silence as a detox. At first, the toxins rise to the surface. You feel restless, uneasy, even attacked by your own mind. But if you endure, something shifts. The storm clears, the mind begins to settle. The silence that once burned now soothes. The deeper truth is this. Silence reveals who you really are beneath the noise. And that is why it feels unbearable, because it shows you everything you've been hiding from yourself. But once you endure that storm, silence becomes not a punishment, but a sanctuary. And in that sanctuary, you will discover a new form of strength. Let's step into it. Silence as inner fortress. Imagine standing in the center of a hurricane. The winds roar, debris flies, chaos swirls all around. Yet at the very center, there is stillness. That is what true silence feels like inside you. It is not about the world becoming quiet. It is about you becoming unshakable, no matter the noise outside. This is silence as an inner fortress, a shield that protects you from manipulation, from insult, from chaos. When you embody this silence, arguments lose their grip. Manipulators lose their leverage. You are no longer tossed around by the emotions of others because you have rooted yourself in something deeper. This is not indifference. This is not apathy. This is strength. The ability to choose your battles, to decide when your voice matters, and to conserve your energy for what truly deserves it. In a world addicted to noise, this kind of silence is radical. It is revolutionary. And once you build this inner fortress, you carry it everywhere. At work, at home, in relationships, even in the solitude of your own mind. But here's the real question. How do you build this fortress into daily life? That is the bridge we cross next. If this journey is opening your eyes, now is the moment to subscribe. Not just to hear my voice, but to remind yourself daily that you are walking a path of strength, awareness, and presence. Don't just consume this message, live it. Breaking the chains of submission. Let's confront the darkest truth. Not all silence is chosen. Many of us have lived years in the silence of submission. The silence where you bite your tongue not from wisdom, but from fear. The silence where you swallow anger, avoid conflict, and convince yourself that it's not worth it. But deep down, you know the cost. This is the silence that slowly eats away at your soul. It erodes your confidence. It teaches others that they can trample over your boundaries because you will never push back. And in time, it convinces you that your voice has no value at all. Nietzsche called this the morality of slaves, a system designed to keep you small, obedient, and domesticated. And if you are not careful, your silence becomes the very chain that keeps you bound. But today, you can break that chain. The silence of submission must die so that the silence of power can be born. A silence not rooted in fear, but in strength. A silence that stands tall in the storm and says, I do not need to explain myself to exist. The question is, How do you make that shift? From silence that hides you to silence that reveals you. Let's explore the turning point, the silence of presence. True silence is not withdrawal. It is presence distilled into its purest form. It is not the silence of the oppressed who dare not speak, but the silence of the master who has already spoken simply by existing. Presence is what gives silence its weight. Without presence, silence is emptiness. With presence, silence is a mountain, unmovable, unignorable. When you walk into a room with this kind of silence, people feel it before you say a word. Your eyes speak, your posture speaks, your calm speaks. And when you finally do choose to speak, your words carry the force of thunder. Not because they are loud, but because they are true. This is what it means to master silence, to transform it from avoidance into authority, to let your stillness reshape the space around you, to become, in every sense, unshakable. But presence is not built in theory, it is built in practice, and to embody it, you must live it in the real world. That is where the journey now turns. Living silence in the world philosophy means nothing if it stays locked in books. Wisdom is worthless unless it touches your daily life. So how do we live silence as strength? First, recognize that silence does not mean passivity. It means conserving your power until the right moment. Second, understand that silence is not about avoiding people. It's about carrying yourself in such a way that you are not owned by anyone's words or judgments. Third, practice silence in small things. In the awkward pause, you don't rush to fill. In the insult, you don't react to. In the meeting where you speak once, but with clarity. Each of these is training. Each is a step toward mastery. Because the world will not stop being noisy. The storm will always rage. But your silence, practiced again and again, becomes the calm at its center. And now, to close this journey, let's anchor silence into your life with 10 practical ways you can begin using it today. 10 ways to wield silence. Here are 10 real-world practices you can begin immediately. 1. Pause before answering. Count 3 breaths before replying to anyone. It disarms pressure and shows calm control. 2. Hold eye contact with silence. A calm gaze without rush to respond unsettles manipulation. 3. Replace arguments with stillness. When accused unfairly, say nothing. Let their words echo against themselves. 4. Use silence in negotiation. After stating your terms, stay quiet. People often reveal more than they intend when you don't rush to fill the gap. 5. Practice daily solitude. 10 minutes of sitting in silence with yourself rewires the brain, lowering anxiety and strengthening focus. 6. Let silence follow mistakes. Instead of defending every error, own it with stillness. It projects confidence, not weakness. 7. Stay silent in gossip. Refusing to engage speaks louder than defending or participating. 8. Use silence as reset. In conflict, take space, say nothing, and return only when calm. 9. Replace sorry with silence. Not every discomfort requires apology. Silence can affirm your dignity more than words. 10. End conversations with silence. Sometimes the most powerful ending is walking away without explanation. Each of these is simple. Each of these is hard. But practiced consistently, they transform silence from avoidance into power. Silence is not absence. Silence is presence. Silence is not retreat. Silence is mastery. The last word. Look back at your life. How many times did you remain silent out of fear, out of guilt, out of wanting to avoid conflict? And how many times did that silence cost you your dignity, your power, your peace? That silence ends today. From this moment forward, your silence will no longer be submission. It will be presence. It will be the shield that protects you and the sword that cuts through illusions. The world does not need more noise. It does not need more arguments. It does not need more desperate voices crying to be heard. The world needs individuals who can stand still, who can radiate strength without words, who can remind us, by their very silence, that true power has no need to prove itself. So walk forward now with a new kind of silence. A silence that commands. A silence that heals. A silence that cannot be shaken. If this message has awakened something in you, subscribe now. Not for me, but for yourself. Because every time you return here, you remind yourself of the strength you already carry, the silence that is waiting to rise within you.